Okay, I think we're getting to what we're going to get to for a number. And I'll start the intro slides, and then if they missed that, they'll at least get in for the real content that you're here for. So we'll get started. Welcome everybody to our March event. Spring is trying to spring, although there's a little winter here and there. The snow missed us, so that's good news. So I will start with intros. Next. Your programs team. Crystal, that's me. I am your program director for 2025. And Danielle is the new associate program director. We have her onboarded, and she helped immensely with this event, getting it set up and getting the marketing materials out. And her and I have already started to kick off some ideas. We've been speaking to future speakers, and we've got some hopefully really good content that you find valuable for the events in the months coming. So that should be exciting. Stay tuned for some updates on that. Next. Sponsors. We are always looking for sponsors, whether it is a sponsor that sponsors the organization as a whole, and gets to be involved in our marketing materials, gets exposure from that perspective, gets to come do some networking events with us. Or if you want to just sponsor an event, let's say you've got a topic that you think people really want to hear, and you've got a space that we can come to hear your content, we would love to get more sponsors. So feel free to reach out to us. The board email is right there, if you're interested in sponsorship opportunities, and we will get back to you. Speaking of sponsors, we have one of our sponsors. Horizontal is here, JP, specifically from Horizontal, and he's just going to give you a little bit of a brief overview on Horizontal. Go ahead, JP.
Thank you, Crystal. Hi, I'm JP Nime with Horizontal Talent. We're based in Minneapolis, headquartered here in Minnesota. Some of you may have known us from either in the job market, looking for opportunities, bringing on contractors. Perhaps maybe you utilize our digital consultancy. They're a Sitecore implementation partner and Salesforce partner. We've been around since 2003, so we're about 22 years old. We grew from Minneapolis to global operations, US, India, Middle East, Australia as of last year, and the UK. We're minority owned, privately held. We're about 120 million in revenue. So we're still coming from those boutique days of services, but we also can scale globally. And we have an exceptional net promoter score. You can see Jamie, my partner. Some of you may have known Jamie from she's got years of UX recruitment within our market. She's been with Horizontal for, I believe, about 14, 15 years. And with that, we do traditional contract to hire, direct hire for our clients. We have a 64% interview to offer rate for those that are looking. That means we typically know our clients really well. We know what they're looking for, and we have a 91% offer acceptance rate after individuals interview with our clients, and we have a 98% completion rate. So I think that speaks really well. We work with locally 14 of the 15 Fortune 5s, and a number of small to mid-sized companies as well. Our focus from day one, from our recruitment side, has been UX, web strategists, info architects, designers, researchers, usability specialists. So this is the world that's near and dear to our hearts. We've since then branched into some other areas, but this is our core foundation. So I was just looking today to see what our scope has been with positions with our clients, and unfortunately or fortunately, we had a CRM upgrade back in 2018. So some of the data's data previous to that I can't get to, but since 2018, we've roughly had 2,100 positions that we've worked on for clients that were in the UX space within those skill sets. So if you're ever looking to add to your team or if you're looking for new opportunities, we'd love to talk to you. So I appreciate your time.
That's great. We appreciate your support for UXPA in the community. And we're really looking forward to doing some really great things later in the year with you in collaboration. So that's great. Okay, and next we are going to present the speakers. So you've got Ben Wood and Megan Pekarik. They are presenting building seamless workflows. And so you can see really it's a focus on how do you bridge that gap between design and development and making sure that you can really optimize and streamline your process. We will take questions. You can submit your questions in the Q&A. We will answer them once the presentation is done, though, because we're not going to stop throughout. So at the end, there'll be a Q&A time, and we will get through everyone's questions at the end of the prepared materials. Okay, Ben and Megan, take it away.
Thanks, Crystal. I will share my screen and get our deck up and running. Everyone's favorite question. Can everyone see my screen? I'm not
Sure
hearing
can.
so
I can
awesome.
even see the thing you don't want us to see.
Oh, what's that?
The bad words.
Oh, well, cool. First of all, I want to thank Crystal, Danielle, Kyla, Mike for the opportunity to be speaking here today. I've been to a few UXPA events, but never had a chance to present, so this is really exciting. We only have about 30 minutes of content, so I'm tempted to just stall here and extend the time, but I think we'll just get into it. This is designing with developers in mind and vice versa. And I'm Ben Wood, Director of Design at Livefront. Livefront is a digital product agency based here in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We've been in business since 2001 and have about 100 employees at this point. Have been growing a lot over the last few years. Design team has grown over the last 3 years from 3 to about 10, and we're looking to continue to grow that, especially more senior level talent. So yeah, if you're looking for a job, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'll give just a brief background on me and where I've been in my career. I was a 2009 graduate of MCAD. I graduated with a degree in graphic design. Thought I'd be doing branding for the rest of my life. That was my first love. That's why I went to art school. But my last semester there, I took a class that I think was called like careers in the future of advertising. This was 2009, so it was all about digital marketing and social media, and that's where I really caught the what then was called digital design bug. Discovered UX at my first job out of school, which was a boutique agency of about 8 people. I was the only designer there, so I had to learn how to design for web and native really quickly. iPhone came out then too, so everything was pretty new. Been doing that ever since, mostly in the agency space. A couple of startups along the way, but that's me. I'll hand off to Megan to introduce herself.
Yeah, my name is Megan Pekarik, and I'm a web developer at Livefront. I graduated from St. Ben's up in the St. Cloud area, and with a degree in computer science. And after that, I started working at a small consulting company. I worked there for about 3 years, and it was very much so. I had to wear a lot of hats there, and I ended up doing some of the design work for the things that we were doing, and got kind of interested in UX UI design. And I ended up doing a UX UI boot camp through the University of Minnesota in 2020, thinking that I might get into the UX UI design career space. And ended up thinking, no, I just want to stay with front end development, but I still love it. I think it's really fun. And so it's really fun when I get to do talks like this and anything that crosses over. So after that, I started with Livefront in 2021. So I've been here a little over 4 years. And yeah, just in the web development space and design stuff when I can.
Yeah, so during those 4 years, Meg and I have been working together on a single product. We're in year 4 now. Before that, though, the product existed prior to us coming on. Livefront's been working on this product for 8 years. So even though we've done a lot of work with one another, we've never actually gotten a chance to start something from scratch. And that was really the inspiration for this talk: is how could we improve our process and the way that we collaborate with one another if we were able to start something from scratch. So we had a few goals that we're looking to accomplish through that. We wanted to take some guesswork out of responsive behavior. That's something that as a design team, we often hear is, we have a mock-up for desktop, we have a mock-up for mobile. What is that behavior in between those two breakpoints, and how does that work? We wanted to prove the design dev handoff process, or really trying to eliminate handoffs altogether. We wanted to make Figma's file structure easier to navigate. That's another question we get a lot is, hey, I have this ticket. I know a design exists for it, but I can't find it in Figma. Where is it? So we wanted to eliminate some of that. And then finally, just improve communication overall. With that, we needed to make something from scratch for this talk. And we first gave this talk a couple of years ago, and we only had a week to put together the website and the presentation. So with no ideas, we did what everyone does when they have no ideas. We went to ChatGPT and said, hey, what kind of website could we make? And ChatGPT said, why don't you make a bookstore for conspiracy theorists? And without spending too much time thinking about how that was going to play out in front of an audience. Certainly not thinking about how it would play out in front of an audience in 2025. We just kind of dove right into it. So apologies for the content. Also, being a graphic designer, I immediately went in and started designing book covers. I selfishly include this slide because for every second that it's up on the screen, I probably put 45 minutes into designing these book covers. Little details you won't notice, so thanks for looking. And with that, we will introduce the tinfoil hat. This is the site that we built together for this. Because this is just an experiment, it's pretty simple. We have a navigation bar along the top. We have a hero image underneath that, a global search. We have a banner. It's actually a rotating animating banner underneath that. A product section for new arrivals, a second product section for recommendations called Rick's Picks that we'll dive into further later, and a global footer.
So here is the comparison of, sorry. Here's the comparison of what I created versus Ben's design. We found this cool Figma plugin called Pixelay that allows us to compare in a nice way. So on the right side of that divider is what I created, and the left side is what Ben created. And we were pretty happy with how close we got to the design after all this process. So today what we're going to do is first we're going to go over the general approach that Ben and I took throughout this project, creating it and iterating on it. And then we're going to go over the file and folder structure that we ended up with inside of Ben's Figma file and my code base. And then we're going to talk about colors, the variables that Ben created in his Figma file and the ones that I have in my code base. Then typography, the same thing, the variables and mixins that we have on both sides. And then we'll talk about spacing, the grid that we used and spacing tokens. And then finally, we're just going to go through the evolution of what it looked like to build a component with this sort of back and forth process that we had.
So we'll get started with general approach. Our general approach really came from a guy named Brad Frost. A lot of you are probably familiar with Brad Frost. He's been speaking about web design and writing about web design since the early 2010s. He's probably most well known for his book Atomic Design, which he published in 2013, which kind of outlined his approach to modular web design and really has become the standard that all of us use. Since then, he's been talking a little bit more about something called hot potato process. I think everyone here is probably familiar with waterfall process. It's this idea that all the design happens up front, that nothing ever changes, requirements never change. You never learn anything about user needs. Those never change. So you put it all together, you throw it over the wall at a developer, they make it work, you launch it, and then you never look back. Hot potato process is kind of the opposite of that. It's this idea that designers and developers are sitting next to each other and handing work back and forth in rapid succession, whether that's literally sitting next to each other in a physical physical space like we had the opportunity to do, or virtually. What it ended up looking like for us was a little bit more like this. There was still a lot of upfront work that needed to happen by design, setting up, the design system, the brand guidelines, essentially, that got handed off to Megan, and then the real back and forth started. So less of a hot potato process, more of a warm potato process. I'm just going to dive into atomic design. I know many of you are probably very familiar with this, but for those who aren't, atomic design really breaks down your website into varying levels of components. So it starts with atoms, which are the smallest of the components, things like labels, inputs, buttons. Those get combined into something called molecules, like the search bar that you're seeing here. Multiple molecules become organisms, like a global header or navigation bar. Once you start combining organisms, those become templates. Essentially, templates are web pages without content. And then when you add real content, then they become web pages themselves, or just pages. We love atomic design. I've been using it as long as I've known about it. My only problem with atomic design is that the Venn diagram between designers and molecular scientists doesn't have a lot of overlap. So especially when I'm working with younger designers who have maybe never used atomic design before, I get a lot of questions of like, is this an organism? Is this a molecule? So even though we took a lot of the principles, we took a little bit of a different approach, which Megan is going to talk about next.
Yeah, so what we ended up with in our file and folder structure is actually what I use in the code base for the project that Ben and I work on right now. So huge win for me. We went for, so the elements is a folder that contains things that are similar to atoms. It's the smallest thing, the smallest components that we have. And the way that we think of it on the code side is these are sort of HTML native elements that have our styles on them. So here you're seeing our styled button and input and things like that. And then we have our blocks, and these are usually elements and other things that make up something similar to a molecule. And then after that, we have infrastructure, and these are things that show up on every page usually. So, here we see our header and our footer, things that carry on between each page. And then finally, we have pages, which is the same as atomic design. So that one worked out well. And the file and folder structure that we ended up with is right here. So on the left side, you can see the structure that we have in Figma, and on the right side, the structure that we had in my code base. So it's super similar, and I have a couple of extra things for various reasons, but everything Ben has on his side, I have on my side as well. And you'll notice on the Figma side, it looks like we have this nice, neat, nested folder structure, but Figma actually doesn't have a way to create nested folders. So what's happening there is there's a couple spaces in front of some of those file names and that little emoji to make it look like it's nested. We really wish that Figma had a way to actually create nested folders, but having it even like this was super helpful to me just to see how things relate to each other, and I could map it back to my code base super easy. And then we also had an assets set up in Figma and in my code base, and this one was super helpful because a lot of times in components I have random images or things like that, and I don't know where to find them in the Figma file. And even if I do know where to find them in the Figma file, I don't always know exactly where they go on my side. Like if they should, like, are they in multiple components? Like, wait, and it was just really nice to know that I'm matching his folder structure. And if I needed something from the books component, I could go and grab it, knew exactly where to put it on my side. It made that whole process pretty much seamless. And then next we have styles. You'll see again, I have a few extra things, but everything Ben has on his side, I have on my side once again.
So next we'll get into colors. For the design system, we took a page from material design, a lot of other really successful design systems out there, and took our core color palette, our neutral, our primary, secondary, tertiary brand colors. Those became our 500 values. And then what we did is we built out the tints and shades of each of those values to either side, becoming 900 through 0 or 50.
And then on my side, I have a variable for each one of the primitive values that Ben has on his side. And we'll get into this on the next slide a little bit more, but I don't use any of these colors inside of the components. These are purely there to point to the second layer we'll get into, but I just want to emphasize that it's important that I have the same setup that he does.
Yeah, and it is really important that we use this second layer. Second layer is really what we call semantic colors. So each of these colors isn't named by the value; it's named by the usage within the site. And the reason why you do that is because, say, you want to take your headline and darken it, rather than finding each individual instance of a headline throughout the site and then changing that color value. You can just change your headline from primary 500 to primary 600. It darkens and it cascades throughout the entire file all at once.
And then you'll see I have the exact same setup here. I have my headlines pointing to primary 500. I don't have it pointed to the actual value of primary 500. So that if Ben makes a change on his side to one of these variables, I'm going to be doing it the exact same way on my side. And then I just kind of wanted to go over this. I have made a few Figma plugins, usually for FigJam and like revolving around sticky notes in our research team and things that they've wanted for that. But I had never made a Figma plugin for an actual Figma design file, and this felt like a good opportunity. So I built this plugin for this talk, and how it works is I click load collections here, and then it populates this drop down. And when I open it, I can see every collection that Ben has made on his side for variables. And so you'll see I'm clicking on color primitives. And then once I go over here, I can see all of the dynamic data from each of the variables in that collection. And then I can put whatever code formatting I want in here inside of the text area. And in this case, I'm making a SAS variable. So you'll see the $ in front, which is what SAS variables need. And then I'm saying, and then put the color name here. And then inside of the RGBA, I'm putting the R value, the G value, the B value, and the A value. And then once I click generate, I have a SAS variable for each of the variables that Ben has on his side, which is great because I don't have to do a ton of copy and pasting. And also I know that I have the same values that he has on his side. So this is still very much so in its beginning stages, but if anyone wants to try it out and let me know what you think, would love to hear any feedback on this.
Next, we'll into typography. Not much to say on the typography end, other than it's really important that every single piece of text that you have on your site is pointing to a text style. Those are the text styles that developers like Megan are going to use. So it's important that nothing is kind of left up to being a unique style or not being labeled. You can see what we have on Figma on the left-hand side. One of the things that changed between the first time we did this talk and now is there were a lot of changes that happened within Figma. One of those is that we added variables, and variables allowed us to create this text set that is responsive. So what you see on the left-hand side are the desktop values of each of our text styles, and then we have mobile on the right-hand side, and we do that for both font size and for line height.
And then on the right side, you'll see that I have a mix-in in SCSS for each one of the typography styles that Ben has on his side. And like you mentioned, super important to always use one of those typography styles on everywhere in every component, because then when I'm, as a developer, going and looking at it, I can see, okay, this is using heading 1. I put my mix-in on it, and I know that I'm going to be in sync with the styles that Ben has, no matter what, as far as font size, line height, all of the dynamic parts of it. And then usually on top of having the variable table, you just have a little frame inside of Figma that tells you what each of the typography styles are. So I just kind of wanted to dive into each of my mix-ins to show how they relate to each of the values in the typography styles. So here I'm saying for mobile, I want my font size to be 36 to match Ben, the line height to be 42 pixels. And then on desktop, I override that, or sorry, and letter spacing is negative 1.5%. And then on desktop, I override font size to be 48 pixels and then the line height to be 56 pixels. And I leave letter spacing alone and font family alone because that doesn't change. And then one thing I wanted to point out is, in these code snippets I have, you're going to see this REM function a lot, and that's just converting pixels to REM so that I can look at Ben's designs, see what it is in pixels, and just throw it in my function and not have to worry about REM conversion. And I know that if users are increasing and decreasing their text size, everything is scaling appropriately.
Next, we'll get into spacing, probably the most controversial part of our talk. I've been doing this a long time. I am a dinosaur, so I still love the 12-column grid. I know it's really fashionable and trendy to go with gridless design, but the way a 12-column grid breaks down into 6, 4, 3, 2 columns and maintains some harmony horizontally throughout your designs, I think is invaluable. When you don't use it, element width at each breakpoint is unclear. Guessing how elements should be spaced as the screen grows becomes a little bit more unclear. And there's a general lack of exactness, I think, without it.
So when Ben talked to me about the using a grid, I had never worked on a project that used a grid in the designs before. So I was like, let's do it. Let's figure it out. And I knew my first thought was we should use a grid framework. Like Bootstrap is a very popular one, but there are a couple problems or things I didn't like about that. Almost every framework, Bootstrap for sure, comes with a lot of component styling, and a lot of the CSS for that component styling would be unused because we have our own styling that we want, or I'd have to go through and delete all of it, which I didn't want to do. And then lastly, you can just never be sure that a third-party framework is going to be maintained or work exactly in the way that you want it to. So I wanted to see how hard it would be to build a grid system to make sure that I'm exactly in sync with what Ben has on his side, which was a fun thing to do and allowed me to have full control over all of the CSS. I could include an overlay component, which I'll talk about later, to check my work and make sure that each component is fitting inside of the grid columns that they're supposed to at each breakpoint. And then finally, I had the ability to add different grid margins, gutters, columns, all that stuff to make sure that the grids that I'm using at each breakpoint are the exact same as the ones Ben's using on his side in the designs.
So this is our desktop grid. You can see that's a 12-column grid with gutters of 32 pixels.
And then the tablet and desktop grid is the same. I have a mix in for each of them, but you can see that I'm passing in a parameter here. This is saying I want 12 columns and I want 32 pixels, just like Ben has.
Then on mobile, we go down to 2 columns with gutters that are reduced to 24 pixels.
And then same thing for me on mobile. I'm saying I want 2 columns with 24 pixels. So I just wanted to kind of dive into what it looks like, the CSS grid on my side. So most pages have this row container element around the entire page saying there's a bunch of rows within me that have a grid inside of them. So then here's an example of one of those child. Here's a row element. This one, all of the children inside of here can say how many columns they want to take up. So this first child in here is saying, I want to take up 4 columns on desktop, 3 columns on tablet, and 2 columns on mobile. And so then that's grid component that I talked about a little bit ago. This is an example of it working. I'm able to have that overlay and I can make sure that as I'm moving the screen, scooching it in and out, that the components are matching Ben's exactly. And I make sure, like, for example, those book picks are taking up those 4 columns and they have the margins on desktop. And then as it gets smaller, those margins go away, which was very satisfying to make sure that everything was correct on every breakpoint.
So other thing that variables allowed us to do with spacing is creating these spacing tokens. Spacing tokens are responsive amounts of spacing that you can put into your design to be consistent. And it's much easier to maintain than having individual, say, gaps, padding, margins that you're adding by hand into each individual element. You can make global changes here that cascade throughout, similar to what we talked about with typography and with the color palette.
Yeah, and so then on my side, I just have a function for each one of the spacing tokens Ben has in the Figma design file, which is great because if I ever see something has spacing small on it and that's consistent from mobile to desktop, I can just throw padding spacing small on there and I know that at every breakpoint I have the correct spacing and I don't have to worry about doing media query overrides and all that. So next, we're going to talk about what it looked like to actually build a component using all of these things that we've gone over in this presentation. So I guess, okay, sorry. So our goal, we wanted to try and sync auto layout and flex displays. Auto layouts are something that you're probably all familiar with inside of Figma design files, and CSS flex displays are a very similar idea. And we wanted to sync variant names for the components that Ben is making in Figma with prop names on my side. They're a very similar idea. we wanted to communicate on what should be and shouldn't be, or should and shouldn't be a component, so that if he was making changes on his end to anything and I am on my end, we know that we're making the same global changes or not. And then we also wanted to use the same names for components so that when we're talking about them, it's very clear what we mean.
So just quickly on auto layout, I'm sure everyone here is familiar with auto layout, but it's worth mentioning because this is where we did find a lot of similarities between what was happening on the design side, happening on the dev side, and where the hot potato process or the warm potato process really came in handy. So auto layout, it's a one-dimensional layout, meaning it's either vertical or horizontal, and offers space distribution and alignment capabilities.
And Flexbox is a very similar idea. It has that one-dimensional layout. It's either flex row, meaning horizontal, or column, meaning vertical. And then it also offers space distributions of the elements within it and those same alignment capabilities. So the component that we're going to go over the evolution of is the book pick component. You might remember it from the beginning when we went over the website. And so what we started with was on the left side, there is all of the text. And that is, this whole thing is an auto layout, a horizontal auto layout. And on the left side is the text, the first child of it. And the right side is just the book image. And that's the second child of the auto layout. So this, underneath that little, this square you're seeing, there's a little orange divider on the bottom of that. And this was just kind of sitting behind the component. It wasn't actually a part of the auto layout at all. And so then when I saw that this was the design, I was like, okay, does it make sense for me to make a transparent rectangle with a bottom border like Ben had on his side? So I decided to make just an HR line and position it absolutely and just make it try and match the designs as much as it can. And then I asked Ben, I was like, wait a second, can we move this divider into the auto layout that because the left side, lots about nested auto layouts going on here. The left side is also its own auto layout with the title and the price there. And so I asked Ben if we could move the divider line into that auto layout so that if the title's long or the price text gets bigger, it's going to scooch appropriately and keep the correct spacing between all of it. But the only thing was I said there's a little bit of a gap between that book image and the divider, as you can see there now. And so I just said that's the only downfall. And he was like, I can definitely move it in there. I don't like the gap, but I know how to fix it. So then he put a negative auto layout gap to prevent space between that divider and the book cover, pretty much just saying, here's the two children, just kind of scooch them over the top of each other. And you can see that there's that gap is no longer there. And instead of using the rectangle, he changed it into the line like I have on my side as well. So for me, I can't use a negative gap that's not valid CSS in a Flex display, which is a bummer. We wish they were more in sync there. But when Ben was actually talking about it, he used the word margin instead of gap. And so then that gave me the idea. I was like, okay, on my text element, I can just put a negative margin just on that element to scooch it behind that book image. And I was back in sync with Ben. And then after all of that, Ben was like, yeah, didn't that work great using that negative gap? I just had to put a little bit of right padding on that title to make sure there was no overlap between that and the book image. And so then I quickly pretended that I had also thought about the overlap and I added the padding on my side with the same little green area. You can see there also 8 pixels like Ben's. And then the next thing we got into was the title element. I noticed that Ben had this set to a fixed height so that everything was pushed down in to the bottom, the title, the divider, and the price for this little block. And I didn't want to do fixed height. So I was like, okay, I guess let's do 60% so that I'm not using fixed pixels. And then I realized, wait, why are either of us putting a height on this box? We can just make it auto and use or make it an auto height and then scooch it everything to the bottom of the frame. So Ben set the element height to hug and he moved everything down to the bottom of the auto layout, and I did the same on my end. So what we ended up with, here's the final container. I have a flex layout with, like I said, the text is one child and the image is the other child. And then Ben has something very similar, but he had that -8 gap for his auto layout. And then I have what I ended up with on the left side in this container is a flex display column, that vertical display. I'm pushing everything to the bottom of the container. I have a gap between the text, the divider, and the price of spacing extra small. And then I have that margin right of -8 pixels so that I'm in sync with Ben and I don't have that divider gap. And then I have padding extra, extra small on top and extra small on bottom. And then on Ben's side, he ended up with something very similar. It's a column or a vertical auto layout, so translates to the same thing that I did. Everything is pushed to the bottom of the container, just like I have. And then he has 8 pixels of padding between the title divider and the price, just like I have. And one thing to note, you'll notice that there's a little, this is like highlighted, that little 8, and that's actually because that is a variable in Figma, and that it translates to his extra small variable spacing token. So I'm in sync with him on that as well. And then you'll see here, same thing, that those highlighted values, the top one is spacing extra, extra small, bottom spacing extra small, just like I have on my side. And then the padding right, like I talked about before, that I added, and same thing for Ben on his side. So our goal and what we felt like we wanted to accomplish, going over everything again, we wanted to take the guesswork out of responsive behavior, which we feel like we did. I didn't have to tap Ben nearly as much as I usually do in our project to ask about specific breakpoints because of the grid, which was really nice. We wanted to improve the design and dev process, which we feel like we did. The hot or warm potato was really nice. And then we wanted to make Figma's file structure easier to navigate and more intuitive. This was a definite win for me because I just got to use exactly what I have in my code base on the regular. So that was great. And then finally, we wanted to improve communication, which we definitely did, just sitting next to each other and being kind of in fluent communication about everything throughout this.
So a few more takeaways, and some of this has some overlap with our goals. The similar folder structure increased dev efficiency. I never got a question of where anything was. Learning how each other build things improved both of our processes, and better components, I think, resulted on both sides, as Megan went over. Megan didn't hate the grid, so +1 point to old folks. Sitting next to each other while building the site made it really easy to toss the work back and forth, to ask questions, to ask opinions, get feedback. So +1 for the Opteo process. And finally, Figma has some improvements to make. First, on our Figma wish list, collapsible nested folders and selection inputs to match the structure within logo styles. So as I said, this isn't the first time we gave this talk. Figma actually did this. So thank you, Figma, for actually putting collapsible folders within logo styles on a file. Fill until max width option for horizontal resizing in the frame panel. Figma added min and max widths as well, so they took care of that. Thank you again, Figma. Defining the width of a frame as a percentage of its parent frame, really important when you're, or really useful when you're using a 12-column grid. This actually does work in Figma. You can put in a percentage, but all it really does is it does the math for you. It says, okay, you want 33%. I'll figure out what 33% is of the parent frame, and I'll put that in as the value. The only problem is it becomes a fixed value, and it doesn't become responsive as a percentage. So still some work to do there. And finally, putting one component in each page like we've done in this file is probably not reasonable for larger projects until we get a real nested file folder structure instead of the spaces and emojis that we have to use today. So that's all we got. The QR code on the right side of the screen there, go ahead and scan that. You can view the code base, you can view the Figma file, download all our slides from this presentation. You can get Megan's plugin that she went over and connect with us on LinkedIn as well. So I think, Crystal, now it's time for some Q&A.
Sure is. We've got questions rolling in. The first one's two-part. The first part is, can you share more about what it was like to work so closely together, sitting next to each other? How was that for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was great. It was, like I said, about 1 week of actual time. So seeing how that actually, works out over the course of like a long-term project, like 4 years is a long time to sit next to each other. But I will say that definitely, made a point to more collaboration earlier on, and that ability to just tap each other on the shoulder. I mean, we don't sit directly next to each other anymore, but she's usually on the top floor, I'm on the bottom floor. So if we need to find each other, we do it that way.
Yeah, definitely super handy for me. There's just so many little questions that come up. Maybe if we, I mean, during this, like we said, it was a very accelerated timeline, so it was almost required that we sat next to each other. But even in general, like if I could just sit there and there's so many little questions that come up, and it was, yeah, it was a good experience.
Okay. The other part of that is on the other side. Have you ever been in a situation where perhaps a developer didn't want to collaborate as closely with design, and how did you handle it?
Oh man, I've been really blessed in my career that I've worked with amazing developers who want to be involved early on. I think great UX ideas come from all over the place, not just people with UX in their title. So I've been really fortunate in that I've never actually come across that in my career. I don't know if you've worked with other developers who have not wanted to get involved.
Honestly, well, actually, yes, at my last job,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah, where we got, yeah, there was a lot of pushback to the designers, and feel like I was the one having fun with it because I had this like this UX bug in me where I'm like, wait, this is kind of fun. But yeah, definitely a lot of like most of it was just like whining about things, but it's like um yeah, I don't know, we got through it. You just kind of have to keep trying to collaborate. Like it's never gonna not be worth it, and you're just gonna get such a better product if you guys can collaborate.
Yeah, I think the argument that you can make is the more collaboration that happens up front, the less problems you run into and the less tech debt you have basically at the end of the project or end of a sprint where, you're not having to go back and making huge changes to the design or redoing a lot of the dev work because you had those questions figured out in the beginning.
Yeah, and one thing I'll actually say as well is the live front designers, Ben included, are always really amazing about if we're like, hey, this is super difficult to do because of this, and this. Like, is it possible if we did it this other way? Like the flexibility makes it so like if you guys, I think if both parties come to the table, like willing to compromise, like we can work a little harder to do this. It might take longer, whatever. But like if both parties are willing to give a little bit, depending on timelines and things like that, that's also super helpful. And we've seen like just better rapport in general from that.
That's great. I mean, not only was the content amazing and beautiful, but you can really tell how you complement each other, right? And just how easy, I'm sure it wasn't always easy, but the hot potato and passing things back and forth. And it's really nice to hear like this is what this means to me, and this is what this means to me, and this is how they relate to each other. That's outstanding. Next question. Did you use dev mode in Figma?
I do use, well, when did dev mode come out? It's like a little bit new.
Yeah.
So the first time we did this, I don't know if dev mode was
I don't
out the
think it
first time we
existed.
did it. So no for that. But for the second time, definitely because something that is, I don't know how I feel about it. Sometimes I'm annoyed that this happens, but you can't see spacing tokens unless you're in dev mode. I don't know why, but it just won't tell you what the spacing what Ben used unless I'm in dev mode. So definitely had to use it when I'm looking at spacing tokens and things like that. I do think dev mode has improved a lot. When it first came out, it kind of just felt like it made everything worse for me. But now it feels like it is easier to like inspect, see spacing, and you just get a little bit of different information. So I do think it's definitely becoming more useful and is very useful as of right now.
Okay. Next, how do you recommend managing Figma file structure for design versioning to ensure that you have good documentation of what the iterations were and avoiding cluttering when you're working with dev and product partners?
Yeah, so we actually split our files up into two files. We have a dev ready file, which is the one that Megan is in. Megan's a special case. She has a lot of design skills, so she actually has edit access to all of her files and sometimes popping in to make little changes for us. But for most developers, they're only seeing the dev ready file. That way, all of the work in progress, the versioning that you're doing is in a more messy, frankly, work in progress file that doesn't impact dev and makes things easier to find.
So
And
you
another
the
thing,
final.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I think another thing is we have a great product manager on the project we work with right now, and so it's very clear. Like honestly, just if I could say, just linking to Figma designs everywhere is the best thing ever. Like if you can just put a link exactly to where I need to look, amazing.
Mhm.
So like that has been super helpful. And like if those are being updated in tickets and things like that, then that always makes our lives easier.
Yeah, shout out Jennifer. She's
Yeah.
our rock. She's
Yeah.
amazing.
That is such a good point. I mean, a project manager, somebody that's coordinating, making sure everything is updated and being communicated is so important in those ways. Okay. How did you decide on breakpoints together?
Yeah, we don't really decide on breakpoints on like a global level. I think most of the time, and we just had this happen today actually, because we're adding new items to a navigation bar on one of our products. And with adding those new items, basically we lost the amount of space that we needed for the search bar to exist at its current size. So really the breakpoints kind of happen on a component by component level based on when they break. We don't decide it up front. It's something that is kind of a back and forth a little bit to make things work.
Yeah, and then like different. So yeah, I feel like honestly deciding like where's mobile, where's tablet, where's desktop has been pretty. I mean, I haven't been involved in the design part of that. I don't know how you guys decide that, but I just kind of am like, sounds good. That's the value, you know? But like Ben said, I think we go back and forth depending on what works for the screen. Like for the header example, like okay, now we're going to use the mobile header on mobile and tablet here, but other components within that page might be using the different breakpoints, you know, so we can be really flexible. I have like a media query mix in like that we use everywhere on my side. So I can just say, okay, if it's tablet and greater, use this version. If it's mobile, you know, and we can mix it around based on what the page needs at each breakpoint.
Yeah, I will say that when we start a project, we're usually looking at pages and the breakpoints in terms of like Bootstrap is kind of like the I'll default back to Bootstrap, but then it really quickly becomes component by component.
Perfect. Ben, when you ask if something is possible and the dev team says no, do you accept the answer and pivot, or do you try to push back?
I think I pushed back a little bit more earlier in my career when I was doing a little bit more of my own development. I mean, back then it was Flash sites, so that shows my age a little bit. I don't hear that all that often. Another place where I think I'm just really fortunate in that I have a great dev team that they're going to completely exhaust their resources and try to make something work before they give up and come back and say it's not possible. We have a dev tenant here at Livefront that is design is the spec, which really means, I mean, it works two ways. On one hand, like every single thing needs to be considered by design. Every edge case, every error state, every loading state, like all of that is done up front. But then on the same side, everything is pixel perfect, and it takes a lot, I think, for you to come back and say like this isn't going to work. A lot of times it's back end issues that we run into.
Right. Yeah. Like if something is happening with our client that it's maybe a call is super slow or something and something can't work a certain way. But with that being said, there definitely are situations where we're like, maybe this can be done, but it would take probably like a 13th of the time if we did it this other way. I mean, I don't know if anyone on this call is a developer, but I think something that I've learned that is super useful when like doing these things with designers is coming with an idea and being like, this is going to be super hard. What do you think of this? And maybe the designer comes back and like, absolutely not. That's hideous, you know, and that's okay, you know, but like at least like getting, because I feel like, I don't know if you agree with this, but it gets your wheels turning about like, oh, maybe I don't like that, but I could make it a little different, you know, to like make it be something that we both can move forward with. But yeah, I just think like wiggle room on both sides is so important. And yeah, so I don't know if I don't know how I would feel. I think it's all about like tone too. Like if you're just like, if you come back as a developer, if I'm like, hey, this is super hard, and it's gonna take weeks to do it this way, if we can ever get it to work, and you're like, sorry, make it work, you know, like it's just gonna have like, I just feel like it needs to if you can deliver the message in a nice way and be like, this is a requirement, we need to do it this way, we got to figure it out. then yeah, you can move forward so much easier.
Yeah, always be the designer that the developers want to work with. You're gonna see a lot more of your arguments go further that way if you have flexibility.
Yeah.
So true. And I thought the example you gave with the gap between the line and the book was a perfect example of it, right? You wanted it a certain way. She came back and said, "Hey, here's what this is." And you're like, "Oh, I don't like that gap." But you were willing to say, "Let me figure out on my side. Let me take that back and figure out how to fix it." And you were able to get to a place where it worked out on both sides, which is really important.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, next question. How much time did it take you to get this Figma infrastructure in place? It looks cool, but I never have that much time.
I mean, it did come together really quickly. I will admit, I will start with a GUI sometimes, like an existing what's out in the community in Figma. There are a lot of great files out there that will take some of that like initial infrastructure and setup out the equation for you and do that for you. A lot of customization needs to be done on top of it to make it your own and to make it work for your clients and their brand and what you're trying to do with the site. But there is some time savings to be had just by going to the community for the infrastructure pieces. And I think we did do that here. It's been a couple of years, but we
Yeah.
put this together in a week. So it came together really quickly. And I think we did start with
I do think it was 3 weeks
it's
that we
3
built this
weeks.
in. Yeah.
Okay.
1 week would have been, I was like, I wouldn't have slept. But so if that makes you feel any better about getting all this together. But I do think, yeah, I think you like imported something that was kind of there, and then we were like, okay, we like this color scheme or something, and then we edited all the variables to like get everything in place.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely like a starting point that I feel like, and it just helped us, I think, be like, these are all the things it came with. These are all the things we have to fill out to make sure is what we want.
Yeah, I do think we came up with our own color scheme, but the
Okay.
structure
Yeah.
that was under like we added the grid, so that structure
Mhm.
wasn't there. I think that there were primitives set up, but we changed all the colors to fit a color scheme that we wanted. Um, I don't think we reused any of the components that were in there except for the button. Like all the states
Yeah,
were set
you're
up for
right.
the buttons, so we just customized on top of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point, right? Why reinvent the wheel if you've got some things you can pull from somewhere else? You might as well start ahead. Okay, next question. How would you get started on actively making an app that was designed for mobile only, responsive to a larger screen?
Ooh, that's a really tough one, actually, especially within mobile apps, because when you're putting together, they're not really thinking about responsive behavior beyond what it would take to get to your accessibility sizes and to landscape view. So I think it's probably just going back and starting screen by screen, component by component, and figuring out that responsive behavior within the Figma file, maybe absent of the screens, so that everything kind of you're using auto layout to make everything move and stretch the way that you want to, and then see how it applies to your larger breakpoints.
The questions are rolling in. You guys are piquing everyone's interest. Um, Even if it took 3 weeks, I've worked places where it took years to implement a fraction of the integration. This is just a comment. Great presentation. Thanks. So it was leading up to there was no question mark. They're just saying you're doing a great job. And I
Well,
agree.
thanks.
Thank you.
We all
Thank
agree.
you.
Thank you.
Um, I have a question. And so for each of you, if you were to, let's say, go back to you at the beginning of your career, or you at a time where you just really kind of needed some advice or needed someone to give you a pep talk or anything like that, like what would you tell either, folks that are just getting into this, if you're mentoring someone or yourself in this, like what is the best advice you have for people?
I mean, being every developer's designer they want to work with, which I already mentioned, is a big one. That I think took me, especially early on in my career, far in my career. The other thing that I would say is you have to make sacrifices in this industry. The technology moves really, really quickly. And I've been doing this long enough where, the way that I go about doing work has completely changed probably 4 or 5 times. The basic principles have stayed the same, but the way of doing things changes pretty rapidly. So you have to spend time outside of work, unfortunately, just continuing to be up on trends, keeping your head up, and looking at what's next in order to stay relevant.
Um, yeah, and I'm obviously not a professional UX UI developer, but I remember during my boot camp, like components were kind of like maybe they were a thing, but I didn't really know how they worked inside of a design file. Like Figma was pretty new. We were mostly in Adobe XD, and then we would like sometimes dip into Figma. But something that I've learned since like being at Livefront and like doing this project and like figuring out all the different things Figma can do, like I just like I feel like whenever I'm doing this stuff, I'm just like, oh my gosh, I would have killed to know how to make these components because like it was just like such a pain to go back. And that was honestly part of the reason why I was like, I think I'm good with development. This is too much. Like I can't, like all of the little things you had to change every single screen, and things like that. And the fact that Figma has figured out how to like actually like if you can like organize your design file and like really be super thoughtful upfront with like this is a component. I'm going to use this component everywhere, and then you need to make a change to that component, and it happens everywhere. I feel like that would be just life changing and save so much time.
Yeah, I'll add one more point, which is I think it's really important early on to get okay with being wrong. You are not the user. Go into testing knowing that what you want may not always end up being what users want, and clients too. I think where I've seen, especially people young in their career, really struggle is when they hold so tightly to the product that they're working on, the design decisions that they've made, because in all likelihood, a lot of time and effort was put into those design decisions. But even the best designer in the world is going to make mistakes, because mistakes can sometimes just be a matter of opinion. Your user base might have a different opinion than you do.
Yeah, good point. Another question, when building a component library for a new web experience, where do you start?
Man, I start with buttons because I think that they're like honestly, with buttons, because there's so many states that you need to create, and that's where things can get really complicated really quickly. Probably before that though, it's color palettes, typography. It's taking all the things that you're going to find in your brand guidelines and making sure that there's a good translation between what was probably made for print and what you're going to actually be using within a design system.
I think that's what you did in this project too. I remember you going through and like making sure that every text, had a typography style attached to it and colors and things like that. And then another thing, like on the project that we work on right now, and actually I believe in this Figma file too, a lot of times, like as a developer, when it's ready, I see a little frame that has all of the components on it. So that's kind of like where the main component lives, which is super helpful to me. And I feel like would probably be nice to build off of because like all the buttons are there, every state in the buttons, and then it's all the inputs and all of and that's really helpful because that's kind of how we work as developers. All of our components live in one place. And like if we just need to see how something works in the different states of it, that's super helpful to have everything in one place.
Perfect. When working in a larger company, how do you balance working closely with dev and also being able to zoom out? Just having enough time to kind of balance both things.
Have you ever worked for a larger company?
Well, our client project is I'm kind of working for them.
Yeah.
But yeah, we like we said, we have an awesome product manager who shields us from a lot of the chaos of our very large company client. But it is a large company, so there's a lot of chaos, and there has been more chaos recently. So we have been exposed to that a little bit more. And I don't even know if I have advice. Just keep on keeping on. Like we are like I feel like it's helpful for me to like every day I have like a list of things that I want to get done. And then once those things are done, or maybe in the middle of them, I can, meet up with our product manager, meet up with whoever and like discuss like, okay, like what are the actual, if this is zooming out, like what do they want at the end of this? Like I'm doing all these little to-do list items, but what is their end goal? What do they hope to have? And those are helpful for me.
That's great. Here, you knew this, you maybe didn't know this was coming, but I knew it was coming, and here it is. How do you feel about AI? And,
Saw our book covers.
I,
Yeah, we're being very cautious about using AI right now. We have experimented with all the Figma AI features. For the most part, I find that they've been really inconsistent in terms of like you run the same prompt twice on a single frame and you get completely different results. So, the AI that is within Figma, I think, has some work to do before it's something that we use outside of maybe like a one-off instance where we need some quick copy. I think AI is incredibly beneficial to like the work that's happening outside of the design work. I have AI often rewrite my emails. I have a lot of fun with image generators. I will admit that I think that I'm a little behind the curve on AI in general. And if you're looking for advice on like how to take your career to the next level, pass people like me by who are really only using it in the ways that come really obvious. I would dive into it because I think there's no stopping AI. It's here and will continue to expand and be used in new and different ways.
Yeah, and I don't know if anyone here is a developer, but I think ChatGPT is super useful for random little like algorithms that you need. Like take this string and take all of the brackets out of it or something that, like things like that, spits it out. And I don't have to like, sit there and think about every little edge case. And then just like I don't know. I think it's like really great for learning, honestly, because a lot of times ChatGPT doesn't get it quite right, but it like gives me an idea and then I understand, then I go look at the documentations and I just think it's a really great starting place. I find myself having like full on conversations with them and like being polite to it. But I don't know. I think it's been super useful for my learning because I feel like I can ask dumb questions to someone who won't judge me.
okay, Figma question. Um, how do you use it when you're starting a client project? Like, how do you think about using Figma? And then, just so that it's sort of beneficial from both sides, what did you find to be the most helpful feature in Figma? So from a design perspective and from a development perspective, like what did you find to be the most helpful to you in your role?
Yeah, Figma versus Sketch. I mean, when we made the switch, there wasn't a lot that was entirely different. I think Figma, as it's progressed, has become a lot more valuable. We talked about variables a few times. I absolutely love variables. I'm not doing everything that I can with them either. I mean, I think it's great for light mode, dark mode. I think it's great for responsive spacing tokens like we talked to, but it's prototyping capabilities using variables, variable content. I've seen other people on the team use them to a point where like I cannot tell the difference between this and working software. It's pretty incredible. I forgot the first part of the question though. How do you start?
Like how do you when you're starting a project, like I think you kind of already talked about, you start with the brand guide, I think is the answer, but I think they want more of like a in Figma, like what do you start with versus sort of
Create a frame or something.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, start. I think it goes a little bit back to the last question of get your colors and your type styles set up right away. I think especially like if you have color styles and you have to retroactively turn them into variables, that can be a lot of hard work, especially if you have styles set up for both light mode and dark mode, and then you have to switch that to variables. So I would I would get into variables and their capabilities as early as possible.
And plus one for the variables. I feel like that's the best thing about Figma as a developer. If I can just look at it and know that everything in that component or whatever, it's going to be consistent and I can just throw whatever function I have on there and know that I'm going to be in sync with design. It makes
Yeah.
you so much more confident in what you're shipping.
Oh man, the consistency level of someone that came from Photoshop days, like it's night and day. Figma's an awesome tool. I know everyone's saying Figma is dead. No one's told me what's coming next yet.
Yeah.
So if anyone knows, please leave a comment.
I started in Photoshop too. I hear you. I'd be like, no, just imagine you click on this and it changes colors. Like now it just handles it. That's good. We got a lot of questions. We are through them all. I want to thank you both. It was a great presentation. The content was great. Like I said, it was just great to hear how well your processes on both sides complement each other, and how well you work together. So I'm so grateful for you being willing to come and speak to our members and to participate with UXP. We're really grateful for it. As for all of the members, we stay tuned. We'll have April event, we'll get something figured out and coming out soon. And then we're hoping to get a few months scheduled in advance so that you can have an idea of which ones will be virtual and which ones will be physical. But we've got some really good ideas and some more really great content coming. Ben, Megan, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It was
Yeah.
great being here.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate
All
you.
right. Bye, everyone.